Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. I've got another YouTube question and answer knowledge bomb video for you today. This is the section where I answer your YouTube questions because I feel guilty that I didn't jump in and answer them in text before. But I think this is a great chance for me to engage with you guys who are active on my YouTube channel, give some love back to you, and obviously in turn answer some questions that other people might also have. As always, I have the time codes for the individual questions in the description as well as in the actual timeline thingy, so you can jump to the question that is most relevant to you. But before I get into the actual questions, just quickly, if you're in the process of treating your home studio and you're kind of struggling figuring out what you need to do, what it is you need to focus on, then I've got my home studio treatment framework for you that you can download at the link in the description. And this is basically my 5 steps that I've realized I need to go through. I think that makes sense to go through in the sequence that I've listed them in order to treat a home studio. So this goes from setting up your listening position, setting up your speakers, how to think about treatment in terms of porous absorption and resonance absorption, how to bring in measurements when it makes sense to take measurements, what to look at when you're looking at measurements, but also when to tie in a subwoofer, how to think about speaker correction, speaker decoupling. All of that is in there, nicely laid out for you to follow in a kind of step-by-step framework so that you know what it is you need to do when you're treating your home studio. So again, if you are in the process of treating your home studio, you're thinking about treating your studio, or maybe you're stuck and you don't know what to do next or what to focus on, make sure you download my home studio treatment framework at the link in the description. All right, let's jump into some questions. So the first one here is by Verloren Geboren, without an H. Dutch, maybe? I'm not sure you're German. But in any case, hi Jesko, I have a question for you. I'm starting my own treatment. I've got some Gutex insulation for free. I found that it has a high flow resistivity of 50,000. The porous absorber calculator told me that it's not much use to make 20 centimeter panels from that. Yeah, that's probably right. So I was thinking of buying some rock wool with a flow resistivity of 10,000 to put in the panels as well. Is it useful to combine these materials? Which one should I place in front? Does combining them provide a flow resistivity of 30K, or should I ditch the Gutex insulation and make the panels purely out of rock wool? It's a good question. It comes up frequently, and if you're not on my email list, make sure you are on that, because I just answered a similar question last week in my weekly email to my email list. So the simple answer is that, yeah, in theory, you can do this, and definitely professional acousticians who plan custom treatments at a very high level mix and match different densities of insulation material, different or porous absorber material. It's not everything they use is insulation material necessarily. And the less dense insulation material goes on the outside facing the room, because what you want is air to be able to, or sound waves more importantly, to be able to enter the absorber unit as easily as possible. And in order for that, you need a low density on the side facing the room. And then as you go deeper into the absorber, you can technically increase the flow resistivity in order to get better absorption. In practice, I still don't recommend you do that, because it is not as easy as just slapping 2 different insulation material types or 2 different densities together. And it's also often not very practical. I recommend you stick to a single type of insulation material. Going to make your life a lot easier just with doing that. That said, if you've got this stuff lying around and you can't be bothered to buy a whole ton or throw everything away, basically, sure, why not? Give it a try. Yeah, it's potentially not going to work as well as just sticking to a lower density, and you can figure that out with the porous absorber calculator yourself potentially. But if you've got it lying around, I'm always in favor of doing the practical that is right in front of you, right? Unless it's completely pointless. Might as well do it. Give it a try. You can always change this stuff later on. Nothing here is fixed in stone. You can always make improvements. You can always make updates. And it's the whole point of my channel and what I'm trying to say with my platform is that you want to get out there and gain experience. It's okay to make mistakes. You're not going to break anything. Nothing is going to be ruined. You can always make changes. The important thing is to learn and gain experience and see what works and what doesn't work, and also get a feel for just how much treatment is necessary to get an effect. Good question. This one is by Paul Slocum. I wish you would expand your channel to talking about hi-fi equipment and other things. Your explanations are perfect, and you're one of the few hi-fi related channels that always improves everything with data. Thank you. I'm glad that you appreciate what I do. I have to say outright, that's not going to happen. So my focus is purely on studios. That is where my experience lies. I know literally nothing about hi-fi equipment. I don't have a sophisticated hi-fi setup in my home. It's not what I like to talk about. There are also, you got to understand, two very different groups of people who treat studios and people who want to treat their home listening space, have very different priorities in terms of what they want. And my focus with my channel, my platform, is on studios, on home studios in particular, and that's never going to change. So unfortunately, I have to say at this point, you will probably have better luck looking at somebody else's stuff. I can definitely recommend darko.audio. I'll link him in the description as well. He's a friend of mine. He does great work on hi-fi equipment and all things hi-fi. So have a look at that if you want some more input on that. Okay, moving on. Irene Zurius says, thumbs up, thumbs up. Thank you, and I agree. Next one. This one is by Jerome de Jong, probably Dutch as well, I assume. He says, what if you face problems at your listening position and don't know what to do? My attic is about finished. The work on the room is done, and slowly I'm installing my system. Installed the 2 main speakers and slammed on a CD. No lows at my seat. 1 meter to the left and right, enough bass. That's what I want, but in my listening position. What is going on? Probably massive standing waves. It's not the biggest room and dropping in peaks and bass through the room. Learned it from your videos. Yeah, you're totally right. And unfortunately, at this point, I have to say what you missed out on is picking the right listening position even before you started treating your studio. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. The only way that you can fix this is by moving your listening position into the right spot in your room, because the low end is mainly determined by standing waves, and standing waves are determined by the room geometry. So you can't change the standing wave pattern just by placing your speakers in a particular spot. To some extent, yes, but the room will dominate the response or the pattern of standing waves. And so you don't get to pick your listening position if you want to balance out standing waves. You need to, well, the room decides where that listening position is, ideally where those standing waves balance out. And so that's the spot that you need to pick to place your listening position, which is why I've developed the bass hunter technique, in order to test your room for the standing wave pattern, no matter if this is a symmetrical kind of square standard shoebox shaped room or an odd shaped room. It's a simple listening test that you can use to figure out what that standing waves pattern looks like, and then make an educated decision on where you can potentially place your listening position, right? So if you're asking, so now what? Well, you still want to do it because it's the only solution at this point. Yeah, you in the most home studio scenarios, you cannot fix the bass response to an extent that you can then freely choose your listening position. In most cases, you simply don't have enough space to do enough treatment to get to that point. So my unfortunate news for you is test the room now as it is. Figure out where that ideal listening position is. It might not be far off from where you are now, if you're lucky, and then make the necessary changes. That is unfortunately what it takes. That is why I keep repeating that you want to place your listening position first before you do any treatment. Good question, and again, sorry about that inconvenient answer. So here's a question from Everett Schutt. Hey Jesko, love your channel. I'm slowly becoming an acoustic treatment nerd. My wife thinks I'm crazy. Awesome, that's exactly how it should be. I'll be starting the build of my new attic studio this week, and I've been doing some designing of the walls. I'm particularly concerned with an old woman living next door, although at 80 she says her hearing isn't much good anyway. She really is quite lenient towards musicians. Her husband, no longer with us, played a grand piano. I'll be trying to achieve as much acoustic separation as I can, in particular the wall facing the next door neighbors. It will be pretty standard drywall technique with acoustic separators, whatever they're called, to connect the drywall construction to the wall. I'll be using 2 layers of overlapping 12mm drywall. My question is it really useful to pay almost twice as much for the materials on order to use green glue between the 2 layers? Is it necessary? Are there any good alternatives? So first up, I made a video about isolation techniques, which I will link in the card in the iThingy box right now. So definitely look at that. You have to understand that my expertise, my experience is definitely not with isolation. It is with acoustic treatment. So those are 2 different things. Isolation is very much more just a plain engineering job. And it is hard to some extent to get right. There are some basic principles you can follow, like just simply adding mass, making sure it's decoupled, making sure it's airtight. Those are the 3 rules of isolation. But on top of that, it's easy to screw up in practice, because small things, small mistakes, like just basically screwing in a screw in the wrong spot and building an acoustic bridge between 2 layers, can mess everything up. So when it comes to isolation work, my standard advice is go to a professional. Get a professional to do this for you. This is something that you will most likely screw up if you just do a DIY first time. If you don't have a problem with screwing it up and you give yourself the kind of the time and the space to reiterate and gain more experience, go for it. But if you need to get it right the first time, don't do it yourself. Go and find a professional who specializes in isolation, in acoustic isolation, because there's just too much that can potentially go wrong, and it is always costly and time intensive. And if you want to make sure it works, the only way to get it right is to make sure that somebody who has the experience and who knows how it works does it for you. Okay, so this is the unfortunate truth with isolation. Don't do it yourself unless you want to experiment and you are ready to fail, right? Otherwise, get somebody, make sure you pay them properly. Isolation is never cheap and never easy. That's the unfortunate truth. But good question. And again, sorry about that answer. All right, next question. This is from Tim. Question: I have plenty of space between my setup and the front wall. Can I use the space where the floor meets the front wall as a bass trap location? I've never seen this done. The ceiling and the front or side walls, yes. I could have a bass trap that is 24 by 24 by 84 inches. My room is so on and so forth. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, quick answer, totally. Yeah, the reason we don't usually do that is because it's impractical and it uses up a lot of space that we could usually use for something else, right? Floor space is always at a premium, and so that's why we don't do that. But yeah, of course, go for it. Next question. This one is from Marcelo Suarez. Yesko, I've searched for this question several times, but I haven't found an answer. Anyone feel free to reply if you know the right answer. I will reply right now for you. This is the great thing about this type of video. I can only get rock wool in 2-inch thickness here. It's not available in other thicknesses. Can I stack various sheets in one panel and get the same effect as a 6-inch panel, for example, if I stack 3 slabs? If so, would it be useful to leave a little air gap in between each sheet in the panel, or better if they're stacked right up against each other? Quick answer, yes, definitely. Just stack those 3 slabs. Don't you leave an airspace in between them. I mean, you can, but I don't think it's worth it. It's not worth the extra effort to make sure that happens somehow. So just stack those 3 units together, get a total of 6 inches, put it in a frame, call it a day. Good question. Here's one from Shanzondo Shinkolo. Sorry about that if I butchered your name. What advice would you give for treating an oddly shaped room like a triangular shape? Well, I would give the same advice that I give to anybody treating an odd-shaped room, and that is to start by figuring out where your listening position needs to be by analyzing the standing wave pattern, which you do using the bass hunter technique which you can download under several of my videos, and also is linked in the home studio treatment framework, which is in the description under this video. And that will tell you where you need to set up. From there on, you plan your speaker placement, which you do using the phantom speaker test, which is also linked in the home studio treatment framework. And then you start planning your treatment around your setup, right? No rooms there aren't fundamental differences. If you have sure, there are fundamental differences, but if you have a rigid approach on how to test for the relevant parameters of a room, you can do that in any room. It's just that all the advice that you will find on the net is usually optimized for square shoebox shaped rooms. But the principles that any of those techniques and rules of thumb are based on apply to any other shape as well. It's just that in those other shapes, those same rule of thumbs won't work, right? So my techniques that I've developed and that I teach take that step back and ensure that they work in all rooms, not just square rooms. Obviously, they work in square rooms as well. And often what you'll find if you go through them is that they will confirm the rules of thumb. Sometimes, often, depending on what your room is like, you will find that the rules of thumb, if your room adheres to like the standard principles that these rules of thumb are based on, then my techniques will find those same spots for you. It's just that it's more reliable, and it will also work if your room is not perfectly symmetrical or perfectly shoebox shaped, or there's something else that's kind of odd about it, right? So again, my home studio treatment framework approach will work in a triangular room as well. Good question. Here's another comment from Claire Hoke. Wow, what an amazing rubber tree. Yeah, that rubber tree was amazing. Unfortunately, it died after I took some clippings, and there's a little brother of that rubber tree living down there, which is doing fairly well. But the original, unfortunately, did not survive, and now I've got a palm tree. I hope you like it just as much as my rubber tree. Here's one from Eve of Spring. Thoughts on acoustic blankets? I'm only recording vocals. I've got them on all walls, plus 4 bass traps in corners, acoustic panels, 2 and 4 inches, acoustic tiles, 0.5 inches, a nice rug. Pretty satisfied with the way the room is sounding now. Great. I mean, that's the whole point, right? We want this to become a space where we can get back to working on music, and that doesn't get in the way of kind of getting back into our flow states and enjoying the process, right? So if you are enjoying this, great. The one thing you have to understand, or that anybody watching this now has to understand, is obviously if you're just recording vocals, and the same goes for like if you're doing podcasting work and any of that stuff, the vocal range basically doesn't go into the low end. It usually doesn't reach much below 100 hertz. Some very deep voices might reach down to like 80 hertz, but that's about it. And it's much easier to treat the spectrum upwards of 100 hertz than all the stuff below 100 hertz. Like the stuff below 100 hertz basically takes up 10 times the amount of space that the stuff above 100 hertz takes. So it's much easier to do, and like 90% of the kind of acoustic treatment products out there, including acoustic blankets, will happily work down to around about 100 hertz. So sure, acoustic blankets work fine. You always have to remember a tool is just a tool. The question is, what do you use it for, right? If you're trying to eat soup, you need a spoon, not a fork. That doesn't mean that a fork is a bad tool. It's just the wrong tool to eat soup, okay? It's the same here. So acoustic blankets work perfectly fine for the intended scenario, for the intended functionality, for the intended purpose. If you're trying to use it for something else, it's not going to work as well. That's all you have to know. Here's a question from Decibel Studios. Love the wood over the panels. How do you know how wide or narrow you have to cut the wood? Someone please help. Lol, thanks y'all, great work. Agreed. Lol, thanks y'all, great work. So this is something that I teach in my online courses, in particular in my course, Build a Better Bass Trap. And if you want to know how to design your own diffuser front, that's how I call these slats, then make sure you're on my email list, and you'll be informed when I open up my course the next time. And you're basically in there, I teach you exactly how to design your own version of the diffuser front, including how wide or narrow each of the slats has to be and how that actually affects diffusion and the patterns and everything you basically need to know. So that's where you will find that information. Here's one from For the Wax. Hi Esco, what's your opinion on setting up an exact square room diagonally? I've read a lot about this technique, giving more length behind the mixing position but keeping symmetry. Do you think it's a good idea? Right off the top of my head, I haven't heard about this in particular. Sure, now that you've said it, there's obviously, it's true that you're getting more length behind the mixing position, but the question is why? Why would you do that? What are you trying to gain? More length behind the mixing position in itself isn't going to make or break the sound at your listening position. And depending on how big your room is, you might only be extending that length by what, maybe a meter, like 3 feet, by moving it diagonally. So I don't think it's worth it. You're probably asking for more trouble than it's worth. Just stick to what works and get back to making music, right? So anyway, good question. Okay, a final question from Brian Rand. Skyline or quadratic diffusion, which one is more effective? Well, that's kind of like saying what is more effective, a Tesla or an electric car. The point is a Skyline diffuser isn't a particular design of diffuser. Some companies just call their diffusers Skyline diffusers. They are based on quadratic residue diffusion or on primitive root diffusion. So there are different types of maths involved in designing a diffuser, and there are some differences in those, but to be honest, this is outside of the scope of what we need to really discuss. The point is more about, are you using diffusion, and where are you using diffusion, and how are you using diffusion? It's not so much about which exact design, win a little, lose a little. It's just, to me, it's just not high enough on the priority list to discuss, but to think about to that extent. But again, so a Skyline diffuser isn't a design in itself. It is just a name for a particular product to make it sound fancy. All right. So that's it for this week's video. I hope I got to answer some of your questions that were relevant to you, and make sure to continue commenting. I do enjoy and I do appreciate you commenting, and as I try and get to as many of the questions as I can in these videos. But for now, let's keep learning to trust our ears and get back to having fun making music. I'll see you in the next video.